Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on supporting foster care involved youth. My name is Brittany Boston, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. Before we jump in, I do want to take care of a few housekeeping items. As participants, you are in listen-only mode, but if you do have questions throughout the webinar, we will pause to take time to answer those, and you can ask them in one of two ways. You can either type them into the questions or chat feature, or if you have a working microphone, you are more than welcome to raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your question that way. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the ICSPS website to view at a later date. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kate Danielson from Foster Progress.
Thanks so much, Brittany. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Like Brittany mentioned, my name is Kate Danielson. I'm from an organization out of Chicago called Foster Progress, and our mission is to empower youth from foster care to transition into adulthood successfully by through our mentoring programs, advocacy, trainings, and lots of other methods. So I want to just get started by introducing the organization a little bit to you. Okay, why is it not going? There we go. All right, so one of the things that we can't do right now that we love to do is take our youth on college road trips. Typically, when we are not forced to stay at home, we would take the students on an overnight trip each summer or fall and visit different colleges around the state of Illinois. We also have a mentoring and scholarship program for youth in foster care. This typically starts when they are like juniors in high school, and then we follow them from their junior year, senior year, and through their freshman year at any institution of higher education. Oh, and the students earn scholarship money from us through this mentoring program. So each time they meet with their mentor, come to a group event, they earn $100 in scholarship money, which then they can use. We're super flexible with how they use it. They can use it for really any educational needs once they enroll in a post-secondary program. And then we do this work, which is equipping the people in their lives, such as higher education professionals, their caseworkers, their foster parents, etc., to be better equipped to work with them and support their needs. And then we do some advocacy work as well at the state and local level. So I want to start with just a little bit of a definition so that we kind of are all on the same page with who foster youth are and what they have experienced. So this first slide just is taken right off of the DCFS website. It describes their mission statement. The Department of Children and Family Services is the department in our state that is responsible for any youth who has experienced foster care. And basically, their mission is to keep children safe who have been abused or neglected and to provide appropriate permanent families for them as quickly as possible. Of course, how well they execute that mission statement is debatable and it varies a lot on a case-by-case basis. So there are approximately 17,000 children in Illinois who are in foster care, and Foster Progress works with the population between ages 13 to when they age out at 21. So that's about a third of the population fall within our purview. So this first slide kind of shows like what the foster care experience would ideally look like. First of all, a mandated reporter, such as like a doctor, a teacher, like a police officer, someone would make a hotline call to the abuse and neglect hotline. And then there might be an investigation into the situation at home. If the investigation shows that there was, in fact, some abuse or neglect, then DCFS would remove the children from their biological family's home and put them into what's called a placement. They usually try to place children with extended family first, and if that can't be arranged, then they would go into a foster care setting. And if for some reason a foster family can't be found, or in other circumstances they might be placed into like a group home, then there's lots of court proceedings to determine whether or not they can be returned home to their biological family. And that can stretch on for many years in a lot of cases, but the eventual goal is to get the child to what's called permanency, or like a permanent family. So someone that is, has legal guardianship of them, whether it's like guardianship, adoption. Yeah, those are the main two types of permanency. But as I'm sure you know, what typically happens in foster care is not this nice, neat, straight line. So usually a lot of hotline calls are made before there's an investigation. And it may be that the child is put into a foster home and then the foster parent give what they call notice, meaning, it's just like you would give notice at a job. Like, I'm not going to keep this child anymore. And it often is like a 2 weeks notice. And so the child may be taken out of a foster home and put in a different placement. They may be taken out of a foster home and placed into a group home. And then sometimes, all too often, in fact, a hotline call is made on the actual placement that the child is in, because abuse and neglect is happening in this placement, which is supposed to be a safe place for them. And then the unfortunate outcome of that is the child never achieves permanency in the form of a family, and instead they are emancipated, meaning they age out of foster care. So as you can imagine, all of this upheaval, all this back and forth, all these different people coming in and out of the child's life has a really deep impact on their educational outcomes, and really all outcomes. So I want to share with you some figures about what happens to youth when they emancipate or age out of foster care. So in different states, you age out at different ages. So here in Illinois, you can stay in foster care until you're 21, if it makes sense. And what we've observed is that different counties throughout the state kind of have different ways of thinking about that. So typically, like we're in Cook County, they'll keep a child in foster care, or in this case, I guess it's a young adult. They'll keep this young person in foster care until 21, unless there's a reason to have them age out before that. In other counties outside of Cook, they will kind of think about it the opposite way, where a child hits 18 and they say like, okay, we're going to age you out, we're going to emancipate you, unless there's some sort of reason to keep you in. So it's just a little bit of a different mindset, but that's what we've seen. But it's different in different states. So some states youth age out when they're 18, no matter what. So in 2011, Illinois had the third highest rate in the country of youth aging out, and it hasn't gotten any better since. In fact, I think it's gotten worse. So Illinois leads the way in some areas of foster care, and in some areas we're really lagging behind, and we'll talk more about that. So that year, about 50% of the youth who exited foster care did so by aging out, meaning the other 50% were like adopted or put in guardianships or returned home to their biological families or that kind of thing. But half of them just aged out. So there was this big study done by Chapin Hall at, is it University of Chicago, I think. It's called the Midwest Evaluation of Adult Functioning of former foster care youth. And it's this really interesting, it's like the biggest study that's ever been done of foster youth aging out. And what they did is they followed like 700 some students as they aged out of foster care and checked in with them at different ages, and just to see how they were doing, and did these really in-depth questionnaires with them to look at all kinds of functioning of what a typical adult has to be able to do. And as you can imagine, those outcomes for former foster youth are pretty dire. So for one thing, before they were age 26, 31% of them had experienced homelessness for a period, 50% had been unemployed, and 57% had been incarcerated before their 26th birthday, which is just astronomical. They also found that 79% of the young women who age out of foster care became pregnant at an early age. We know that of 17 to 18-year-olds, these numbers are not from that study. This is just different outcomes. But 17 to 18-year-olds who are in foster care have typically experienced 5 or more school changes. And we know that almost 77% of the young adults who age out of foster care end up using public assistance. So it really, I mean, if people need, sort of the economic nudge to take care of this population, that last number should give them what they need, all the fuel that they need to do some work in this area. Because if that many of these young people end up using public assistance, then they're not independent, and it's costing the state a lot of money. So these numbers are from the Chapin Hall study. 86% of those young people that they interviewed throughout the Midwest said that they would have liked to get more higher education, to get a degree, to be able to achieve the kind of life that they want to have. So 86% of them want to go to college, but then nationally only about 3% will actually obtain a degree. Here in Illinois, Foster Progress looked with the help of ISAC, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, at the number of youth who so I want to be really careful about how I say these numbers, because they mean something very specific. So, ISAC oversees the MAP grant. So what we know, what ISAC can tell us is, they have all the FAFSA numbers, and there's that box you can check on the FAFSA that says, like, yes, I have experienced foster care. So in 2018, ISAC was able to look at all the FAFSAs and see that there were 3,028 people who checked that box to say, yes, I did experience foster care. Now, of those 3,000, only 835 ended up enrolling in college and claiming the MAP grant. And youth from foster care they should pretty much all be getting the full MAP grant. So it should, if they enroll in college, they should be getting the MAP grant. And then we know that just statistically speaking, less than 58 of those 3,000 people are likely to end up graduating with a degree. So you can see just how many were interested in college, and then how few will actually finish. So let me pause there. We're gonna, the whole next section is going to be, like, what hurdles our students face, what makes college difficult for them, why these numbers are so low, and then lastly, like, what are solutions to those barriers and how can we address them, and my sort of recommendations for you all. So at this point, are there any questions about, the info that I've given you so far?
And I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question, you can type them into your questions or chat box. Or if you'd like, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can have a conversation with us that way as well.
Okay, we're good.
Hand raised. So Lisa, I'm going to unmute you. Lisa, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, you were going through several statistics there that before age 26, 31% experienced homelessness, 57% incarceration. Okay, and 50% had been unemployed. All right, yeah. I am working with trying to work with a young man. I'm at Richland Community College in Decatur, and he's been in the foster care. And so I'm trying to get a better understanding how I can serve this young man. So, and well, I don't think he's been incarcerated. He's on that other, but yeah. Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Yeah, no problem. And I can make this available for everyone after as well. Okay, so this is where we left off. Were there any other questions before I move on?
I don't, not at this time.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to introduce sort of a list of 8 hurdles that our students typically, or is it 10? 10 hurdles our students typically face, and then we'll look into a few of them that you in particular can have an influence on in your positions in more detail on the following slides. So let me just introduce these first. So first of all, at Foster Progress, as we're helping our youth to access college, we find that there is just an astronomical burden of how much colleges and financial aid institutions and the government are asking them for documentation. And so if you can imagine imagine yourself when you were 18, like if you were like me and like most of the students that I work with, you probably don't have a nice organized file folder of, all of your taxes and your pay stubs and your bills and, those kinds of things. So, I mean, in a lot of cases, our students do not even actually have access to things like their birth certificates or their social security cards. And in particular, it can be difficult for them to get things like a state ID or a driver's license. And then if colleges are requiring them to, verify their status in foster care or verify their independent status on the FAFSA, those kinds of requests from the colleges are very overwhelming to our students. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can minimize that hurdle for them. Our students also have educational deficits, and what I really want to emphasize for you is that this does not necessarily mean that they have intellectual deficits. So a great example of this is this young woman. I'll just call her Sally for privacy's sake, but Sally, we met her last year and she's a student at Northern Illinois University. And she is an incredibly smart, incredibly bright, and very ambitious young woman. And she never went to high school until she was 16 years old. So if you've read, there's a book out, a novel out, or it's actually a memoir, and I don't have the name of it on the tip of my tongue here, but it's really similar to that story. So this young woman, Sally, had never been to high school, and when she came into foster care, she finally went to school for the first time, and she made up for it. I mean, she learned really quickly everything that she had missed out on, and now she's a nursing student at NIU. So she's such an incredible story. So just because a student may have missed some content doesn't necessarily mean that they're incapable of learning, but because of the abuse and neglect that they faced in their biological families, and then because of moving around from school to school throughout their experiences in foster care, typically they've missed some things. So they might require a little bit of extra grace because of that in schooling. All of our students have experienced trauma as well. So just by nature of the fact that they were brought into foster care and removed from biological parents, that in itself is traumatic. And then their level of trauma varies from case to case. I mean, in some situations, you know, they go immediately into a really lovely family who adopts them and they have permanency. That doesn't mean that they haven't experienced trauma. Maybe they've experienced a little bit less. And then we have, you know, students who have been through it all and, you know, more than you can imagine or describe. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of our students are facing early parenthood. And of course, in many cases, there's that lack of caring adults and family ties. The financial instability is a huge hurdle that we're going to look into more in depth. There's biases. So unfortunately, I see these biases among even their foster parents who are taking care of them and among their caseworkers who really kind of hold the keys to opportunities for them. And of course, in the school systems and everything as well. So it's just, you know, there's tons of people who, whether they say it out loud or not, think that these students are not as capable. And so they're really withholding opportunity and not providing the level of support that they could be. Many foster youth have more medical issues than a typical non-foster youth, just because of the trauma that they've been through. Housing insecurity is a huge barrier we're going to talk about in a lot more detail. And their mental and emotional health, because of the trauma that they've been through, typically that can really take a toll. And, you know, we all have our different coping mechanisms. Some of them are healthier than others. And so it varies from student to student how well they cope with the trauma that they've experienced, but it's definitely an issue. So that's the quick overview of these 10 big hurdles that our students face. And we're going to talk about the financial barrier first. So let's dig into that a little bit. The number one reason that youth either don't go to college or that they cite for dropping out of college is finances. So as you can imagine, youth who have experienced foster care generally don't have the same safety net, financial safety net that those of us with a typical family would have. And so having financial aid is incredibly important to them. They cannot afford to pay for college out of pocket. They just cannot afford it. And they are also oftentimes paying for, you know, meeting their own essential needs as well through working part-time jobs and things like that. So another issue that we see is insufficient or incorrect information about accessing financial aid. And so it's really important that we provide financial aid or provide information that is correct and easily digestible for them. And then another thing to notice, which I'm sure, you know, this is true for a lot of different populations, and so I'm sure you're hearing more and more about this kind of thing, but small fees that are charged to a student, you know, $100 here, $200 there, that are not covered by financial aid can become an insurmountable hurdle for these students. And, you know, oftentimes you know, those of us who are kind of running these institutions and these programs and these schools will say like, oh, we can waive those if they just ask or if they just come and talk to us. But, you know, our students don't always know that, and they don't know who to ask and they don't know how to ask. And so if those fees are so unimportant that they're easily waived, then why are we charging them in the first place? So the solutions, oh, and sorry, I have a couple more points here. Student loans might be inadvisable for this population because they're so independent. They don't have the family support to rely on. You know, oftentimes they don't want to take on any debt. DCFS offers a program called Youth in College, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. Youth in College is a stipend that these youth get once a month, and it's like, I think they raised it to $537 a month this year, which is, you know, it's nice to have. It's a decent amount of money, but it's just not sufficient for youth to live off of. To, you know, most of the youth that we see, if they're receiving financial aid and they're receiving youth in college, they're still having to also work part-time jobs, or in some cases even full-time jobs, and it can just be really overwhelming. So the solution that we recommend are, first of all, that we just offer these youth generous financial aid packages that do not include loans, and easy access to emergency funds. So I know there's been some good work at the city colleges about offering quick and easy access to funds that can be used for meeting any student's essential needs. And I just applaud them for that. It's really incredible. And I think it will be hugely important to foster youth and many other populations in just being able to get through college. And then, like I mentioned, just having information right at the student's fingertips. You know, we all get so caught up in our jobs and our own lingo and the acronyms and the, you know, the buzzwords and everything, that we forget what it's like for a student coming in contact with this whole world of college and financial aid and loans and grants and scholarships for the first time. You know, that they may not completely understand what you're asking for and that kind of thing. So if you just keep it, you know, keep it simple, keep it straightforward, and just be ready to be really helpful. So tuition and fee waivers are available for youth in foster care now. At any student who any student who was ever in foster care in the state of Illinois can now have tuition and fees waived at our public schools in Illinois. So that's wonderful. Unfortunately, they still have a lot of costs with room and board, and I know that that's not typically the case with community colleges, but I think there are a few community colleges who have dorms, so we could talk a little bit about that. But yeah, regardless of whether they're paying tuition and fees, they still have living expenses that are quite burdensome for them while they're going to school. Let me just pause a second. Are there any questions at this point?
We did have one question coming through asking, are you familiar with the #RealCollege movement and the work being done by Sarah Goldrick Rab and the Hope Center for College?
Oh, I've heard of the Hope Center. Yes. Oh, I was just talking with someone at Feeding America who specifically works with college students and hunger. But I'm going to write down this Real College. It was #RealCollege. Is that right, Brittany? Okay.
Yes, and the website is hope4, as in the number 4, college.com.
Hope for College. Okay. Yeah, so I know there's work being done in general for folks who are going to college, not specific to foster youth, folks going to college who are experiencing hunger or food insecurity, and who are experiencing housing insecurity. And so, yeah, I think that those efforts can be helpful. And like Like I mentioned, the city colleges are looking at, the essential needs of college students, the things on the sort of bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it's like, okay, we need to have shelter, we need to have food, we need to have, what's the third thing? Shelter, food, safety, security, or something like that. So, we need to have our basic needs taken care of before we can begin to think about learning, right? And so I think that what this person's pointing out is that there is some work being done more generally about meeting students' basic needs, which will definitely impact this specific population of foster youth as well.
We did have another question come through.
Okay.
It says, I am working with a student trying to obtain his GED or high school equivalency. So what about those fees? He also expressed interest in a CTE training program after his GED.
The fees for the GED, is that what the question is? Those should be waived. And if he's still in foster care right now, his caseworker should be able to point you to whatever needs to be done to get fees waived. Okay. So like I mentioned, DCFS has this new tuition and fee waiver as of 2019. Only a few students are taking advantage of it at this point. Like I mentioned, public colleges in Illinois are required to waive tuition after financial aid is applied for any youth who have experienced foster care. But because of Pell and MAP and other aid that is applied first, the amount that is being waived is pretty small. And most of our youth and the foster care community hear free tuition and they think, oh, college is free. And of course, then when room and board costs or other living expenses come up, then they realize that not everything is taken care of and this is going to actually cost quite a bit. So there is a little bit of confusion about how students should be accessing this waiver, but there is a DCFS form to fill out, which is linked here. And it is up to the colleges themselves to be waiving tuition and fees, and DCFS will basically just like get in touch with the schools who they're aware when they're aware that there's a student who was in foster care attending such and such a school, they'll get in touch with that school and let them know, okay, it's on you guys to waive this tuition and fees. For community colleges, I know that typically the Pell Grant and the MAP grant cover all the costs, and so I don't think that usually this tuition and fee waiver needs to be applied at community college level. Okay, so the next barrier that I wanted to address is just the lack of family support. So because there is no permanent family or limited permanent family support, our students really struggle. And, I had a young lady this past year, also at NIU, it was her first year there. Her name was Danielle, and she had a roommate who was not in foster care. And I actually helped Danielle move into campus because her foster parent wouldn't do it, which if you can see me, you saw my eyes roll a little bit on that one. But anyway, Danielle and her roommate, they both experienced some depression in that first year, which is really common because you're in this entirely new environment. Whatever support system you may have had in the past, you're probably really far away from. It's hard. College is a lot harder than high school for most of our students, and they're completely independent for the first time. So it's pretty common for students to go through depression. And while Danielle's roommate had a whole family that she could go visit, that she could talk to, that she could rely on, that could come visit her, that could make sure she's okay, put her in touch with a counselor, put her in touch with the campus counseling center or whatever is offered on campus. Danielle doesn't have those people. She had been previous to going to college, she had been living with a foster parent for a number of years. I think it was like 5 years, who just really treated her like she was a boarder in her home. Like, she provided sort of the bare minimum, the bare essentials. You have a roof over your head, you have a bed to sleep in, and here's some food. But like, Danielle had to cook for herself. She didn't eat with this woman and her biological family. They didn't sit down and eat meals together. And so it wasn't, Danielle wasn't going to call that foster parent when she was away at college for like emotional support. And so that's the kind of situations that we see quite often, like whatever the last placement was before they go to college, they don't really maintain contact with them or keep in touch or see them as as their family. And so there's not a person to rely on for something like a ride to college or someone to visit over the holidays. And of course, there's no financial support from that person either. There's nobody, giving you gas money so that you can get to work. There's nobody putting, doing something special for your birthday and things like that. So it's tricky because their status in foster care is confidential and it's protected, but there are some ways around that, some ways that you can get connected to the youth in foster care when they're on campus. So for example, let me see, what time is it? All right. Example, you can offer a meet and greet. So I've seen this at some colleges where you would just, through the financial aid office, you can have them send an email to everybody who checked the box that they had experienced foster care and invite them to come to an event. So in that capacity, then they would be self-disclosing. Or say you might have like a club or an event or a booth at your, maybe if you have like a on-campus, like a fair, what do you call those? Like a fair for extracurricular activities and stuff. Maybe you set up a booth for youth who have experienced foster care, some way for them to self-disclose that they have experienced foster care so that they can connect with other people who have also experienced it. It can be really powerful. I know they do that at Illinois State University, and Northern has a club as well. So just a way for them to connect with each other can be powerful. If you can identify a liaison on campus who, may get in touch with the DCFS folks who are in charge of their programs for college age foster youth, and who then can, provide some of that support. And if you can do something like putting like a badge or a sign up in your offices that say, have you experienced foster care? Talk to me. I can help you access additional financial aid or that kind of thing. So those are some ideas for how you can offer additional support. And again, I know that there are efforts made to reach out to and support many different communities. And so this is, in some ways, like foster youth overlap with, for example, like first generation students. And so any efforts that you might make for first gen students, think of foster youth in those kinds of solutions as well. Okay, let me grab a sip here. Okay, so the other barrier that I want to look at in detail is housing insecurity. And I don't know, is there anyone on the call who you do have housing on campus? Or is it mainly students are living in apartments and things, or with family?
I think the majority are community colleges that do not have housing, but I did see at least one or two hands raised
Okay.
that do possibly offer housing as well.
Okay. All right, so just for your information and knowledge, I want to talk about where the students are typically living before they come to college. And they may not be living in dorms in your circumstance at your schools, but before they come to college, they're typically living in one of three places if they're still in foster care. So they may be with foster parents, they may be in an ILO, which is an independent living option, or a TLP, a transitional living program. So with foster parents, you know, it may be a situation like I previously described. A lot of times when our children are still in foster care into their teenage years and young adult years, it's not always the case, but it's typically the case that that means they've been in foster care for a long time, and so they've probably moved a lot. And so if that's the case, then again, typically they don't have an amazing relationship with their foster parents. And that, I mean, it can be two-sided, you know, it may be the fault, quote unquote, of the foster parents or of the child or both, you know. I'm a foster parent. I have two biological children, one child who we adopted, how long ago was that? 2 years ago now, but he lived with us for 4 years before that. And then more recently, we became guardians to another child. So we have 4 kids, and you know, foster parenting is not easy. And so I do get frustrated with the foster parents that we work with, but I also feel a lot of sympathy for them because, you know, having somebody else's teenager who's been through so much come and live with you is no easy task. So all of that to say, just the relationship is not always ideal. It's not always like what like a typical family or very supportive. And so a lot of times when youth leave a foster home, they don't really look back, and they don't go back to stay there over holidays and over the summer and things like that. ILOs are, you know, technically they're still considered foster youth, but they have their own apartment and they get a little bit of a stipend from DCFS to help pay for that living option. And then the transitional living program is more like an agency, a foster care agency might own an apartment building, and one of the apartments is like an office where they have caseworkers, you know, rotating through, and then the other apartments are all youth from foster care, you know, living somewhat independently, but still having like a little bit of that supervisory person in the building with them. So that's a TLP. Regardless, a lot of times when they move to on-campus housing or they begin college and get their own apartment, then they move from that previous placement, the foster parent, the ILO, the TLP, those are all considered placements, into youth in college, which is also a placement. And the tricky thing about youth in college is that there's no mechanism to help them find housing over the summers, for example. So they're just expected to kind of figure it out, and you know, they don't necessarily have a place to go back to. So our advice for if you do have like apartment buildings on campus or dorms on campus, do try to keep dorms open during the breaks. If you have a program for like international students where, you know, maybe a professor hosts an international student over Thanksgiving break or something like that, if you have that kind of thing, you can include foster youth in that or create something separate for foster youth. Oops. And then, of course, you all don't have a lot of say in this, but our recommendation from Foster Progress for DCFS and for different state agencies is to offer these youth in college a more stable placement. Okay, and then I think this is the last, what time is it, 2:15? This is the last like barrier that I want to look at in depth with you all, and I kind of talked about it a bit when we first brought it up. Youth often don't have access to these documents, and when they get requests for them, like if you say, hey, we need your verification of non-filing, they'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and okay, I guess I'm just not going to go to college, which is really unfortunate, but it happens, and it happens with first generation students and any student that's like considered a special population. So our solution, what we recommend is whenever possible, have staff verify a student's status in foster care instead of asking the student to verify. So you can actually, if you come across a FAFSA and it says that this student is independent because they experience foster care, you can actually call DCFS, and there's a number to call to verify status, and you can say, was Sally Smith ever in foster care in the state of Illinois, and they can say yes or no. Also, please only require what is federally mandated in terms of verification. So we did a little digging this year because we saw so many students getting tagged for verification, and every college that asks for some sort of verification for the independent status on the FAFSA, every college has their own mechanism for verification. In some cases, it's just what is mandated by the, what agency would that be? The Department of Education. I don't know. You guys know what I'm talking about. This is where it gets hard to teach a webinar because I don't have the back and forth. But anyway, the federal government has its requirements, which are minimal, and then different colleges will tack on their own verification requirements as well. And so you don't have to do that as a college, is really my point here. Like, you should only be requiring what, the bare minimum, because you're just creating so many hoops for our students to jump through when they're already facing so many obstacles to getting into college in the first place. And then again, similar to the financial slide, just train your staff to use really plain language, not those technical terms, not the abbreviations, and to give really clear instructions on where to find these documents. So, when I first started this organization and had a student get tagged for verification, they asked for a verification of non-filing letter, and I was like, I have no idea what that is. As a 30-something-year-old with a master's degree who speaks English and has a stable family and was raised by a stable family, like, that was a significant hoop for me to figure out. And so, for this 18-year-old who is doing this completely on her own, aside from the foster progress programming, it's a pretty significant hurdle. So it's just something to think about and to help these students to walk through that process. And then, if possible, require that verification only one time. So don't ask them to continually provide you with more and more documents. Okay, questions about that one?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any. I wanted to give them a minute, but I'm not seeing any come through.
Okay. So there isn't a ton of research on youth from foster care accessing college. However, one researcher at University of Illinois at Chicago at the Jane Addams College of Social Work is Jennifer Geiger, and she's done a bunch of work looking at any programs that colleges have to support foster youth. And here are her recommendations. So we have to think about these students from a psychological or emotional perspective, of course, their academic perspective, social and practical. And so here's her key program components recommendations. Whenever possible, offer and connect youth with counseling and housing, of course, and academic support. So if there's a tutoring program on campus, make sure that these youth in particular know how to access it. And also, if you can offer coaching and mentoring, you know, a really early, you know, warning system where somebody is being, proactive is the word I was trying to think of, where, so, you know, there's a person on staff that's being really proactive in reaching out to these young people in advance of them coming up with problems is really helpful to them. And then connecting them with other FCAs for foster care alumni. So like we mentioned, just providing them with opportunities to connect to each other, and then helping them to make relationships with on-campus units, whether it's tutoring, financial aid, those first-gen programs, you know, whatever you have that helps them to get connected on campus is really critical. And I believe this is the last slide that has a bunch of content. So it's just recommendations for things that are helpful for foster youth to succeed on college campuses. And this last point that I just brought up, campus-wide professional development, Foster Progress would be happy to come to your campuses to teach whatever departments are interested in learning more about this group of students. And, you know, if you are interested in setting up a program on campus, we can bring a whole bunch of articles and recommendations for you and get you connected to other colleges and professionals who are interested in supporting these youth as well. So like I've mentioned a couple of times, a lot of the efforts that we see on campuses for other populations, whether it's homeless youth or youth experience, first generation, or you know, other underserved or protected populations, all those efforts are going to also be helpful for foster youth. I think they do have some unique needs, and it's important to be kind of aware of the things that maybe they might have gone through. But yeah, they do have a lot of things in common with like first gen students and other populations like that. So I have tons of articles here and plenty more where that came from if you're interested in further reading. And like I said, I'll get this presentation to Brittany and she can pass it on to all of you. And I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
So we do have one question. We actually have a listener from Texas on with us. And so Shelley, I'd actually be very interested to hear how you heard about our webinar. But she's curious as to if there are any similar organizations in other states.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about Texas specifically. There's a few big ones that are national, like Together We Rise. And I'm trying to think. So my contact information is on this last slide. And if she would like to email me, I can send you a list.
Perfect. And Kate, I actually have a question. So a lot of our participants on the phone work within the community colleges, and they focus on career and technical education. And Care Youth is now one of those that fall under special populations.
Mhm.
And we work a lot with them on ways to obviously support these special populations, but also marketing and recruiting
Mhm.
populations into career and technical education.
Mhm.
So, do you have any thoughts on what the best forms of contact and ways to reach these particular students might be?
Yeah. Um, Definitely, there are departments in DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, that are specifically focused on providing opportunities for foster youth to further their education after high school. And I know that, for example, Kaleidoscope has a it's a program called Find Your Future. And I'm trying to decide, it's an internship program. I'm trying to decide if that would be the right fit for technical education, but it's worth asking them about it. It's called Find Your Future. And then, actually, you know what? I will just, since you guys can see my screen, I'll point you to the right page on DCFS's website. If my internet is going to be cooperative. So I think it's under Brighter Futures, educational resources. So here's Kim Peck is a post-secondary education person. And, you know, she can put you in touch with the right person if she's not the right person, but she can help, you know, if you wanted to market to all youth in foster care, she could send out an email to like every caseworker that works with foster youth and get your program in front of their eyeballs. So I think that would be a really effective way to do that. And then just in terms of, you know, working with students like who come to, so Foster Progress's population that we work with in Cook County and a little bit outside of Cook County are those youth who are specifically like interested in furthering their education, whether it be college or technical school. And so if you wanted to have a more targeted audience, you could certainly send me your information and I can definitely pass that on to our students and put it on our social media pages and stuff as well.
Wonderful, that would be great.
Mhm.
We did have another question come through, you know, with the pandemic and the shelter in place that we're all experiencing. How has that affected this particular population of students with,
Mhm.
you know, needing internet access and the possibility of the online remote learning becoming the future for especially higher ed institutions?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's been really hard for our students. So we've had my program manager and I were joking that like every Friday at 5 o'clock we have an emergency. So we've had a number of youth who have left the home that they're staying in, whether it's a foster home or in one case it was an adoptive home, because you know it's hard on all of us. And you know I have 4 kids and a dog and a husband, and we're all home all the time, and we love each other, you know, and so it's difficult being sheltering in place with people where the relationships are complicated, such as a foster parent and foster child, and it's difficult living with a teenager, period, even if they're your biological child. So, so just that piece of it is already hard for our students. We also worry because, you know, mandated reporters are people like teachers and doctors and our children in our state are not in front of those eyeballs every day anymore. And so there have been a lot fewer abuse and neglect hotline calls. And so we're really worried about the safety of our children, because we know that the abuse and neglect has not stopped happening. It's just that the mandated reporters and the people that are, that care about them are not able to see them and make sure that they're okay and know when that's happening to be able to make those hotline calls anymore. In regard to them continuing their education, at Foster Progress, we have made sure that each of our students have a Chromebook, and have internet access, but that is definitely a concern for youth who are not in Foster Progress programming. And so I think it would be, it would make the most sense. It would be the most helpful for colleges to be offering whatever technology students might need in order to access those educational resources like class. So yeah, I mean, providing them with laptops is incredibly helpful. Yeah, I think that's all on that topic. It's tricky. It's a tricky time.
All right, well, we are at time, and those are actually all of the questions that we've had come through. So Kate, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share this information with us. It's been informative and hopefully will be useful for everyone. So thank you very much. And to everyone, thank you for participating, and have a wonderful Wednesday. It's Wednesday, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thank you, guys.